So we have already covered of the Satipatṭṭhāna objects. We already covered the first two, Kaya and Vedana, body and feelings. So tonight we'll move on to the next one, which is Citta. So Citta, usually translated as consciousness. So now, what is consciousness? What is Citta? So it is this mental quality of knowing. Okay. So it's the knowing of the object. That is its nature. Okay? The mere knowing of the object. Okay? It's a basic state of knowing of the object. Okay? So each time we experience an object at any of the 6 sense doors. Okay? So in this experience, there's an object, there is experience, and there's the mind that experiences the object. Okay? So if you observe the mind, there are various mental states involved, called the Cetasikas, mental states. Okay? So these various mental states, they are working in order to experience the object. Okay? So there is manasikara, the attention that turns the mind towards the object. There is cetana, the volition that motivates or views the mind to experience the object. There's vitakka, that applies on the object. Vichara, that sustains on the object. Okay? There's ekagata, the one-pointedness, okay? That fix the mind on the object. Okay? There's sanya, that perceive or recognize the object, and so on. Okay? And there are all these various mental states, okay, working on the object. But behind all this, there's the basic state of bare knowing of the object. Okay? So that bare knowing of the object, that is citta. Okay? And so in your practice, if you note the state of knowing of the object, so you are noting the citta, that's cittanupassana. Okay? So citta is the basic state of knowing, the bare knowing of the object. Okay? But in order for citta to know the object properly, okay, it cannot stand alone. Okay? So on its own is not enough. Okay? It needs the help of the other mental states working alongside it before it can know the object properly. Okay? So as we mentioned just now, so as volition, the cetana, to view, motivate in order to know. As manasikara turns towards it. Vitakka, apply, vichara, sustain. Ekagata, one-pointedness, fix. And sanya, perceive, recognize. Sati, mindfulness, establishes on the object, and so on. Okay? So only if all these various mental states, each carrying out their respective function, they work together alongside citta, then only will the citta able to know the object properly. Okay? Therefore, citta always arise with this mental states, this cetasikas. Okay? Citta never arise alone. Okay? So wherever citta is, the cetasikas together. Okay? So it's like the king and the ministers. Okay? So it said the king rules the country. Okay? But the king alone cannot rule the country properly. Right? Too many things involved in ruling the country. So what does the king do? He has to appoint ministers. So you become minister of finance, another one become minister of defense, another one minister of education, and so on. Okay? So they each have their own function. Okay? And they work together, and together they help the king to rule the country. And wherever the king goes, the ministers also follow along. Okay? And the king is never alone. So in the same way, this citta, he said citta knows the object, but on its own it cannot know the object properly. So it needs all these various mental states and help it to know the object properly. Okay? So wherever citta arise, cettasika also arise together. Okay? Now, because citta exercises function of knowing in conjunction with these other associated cetasikas, so its basic nature of knowing is affected or modified by nature of this associated mental states. Okay? So if citta, the knowing arise with, let's say, lobha, greed. So it knows the object, but it knows the object in a greedy way. Okay? If it arises with dosa, angry, it knows the object, but it knows it in an angry way. So if it arises with delusion, then it knows in a deluded way. Okay? If it arises with mindfulness, sati, then it knows deeply, carefully, thoroughly. Okay? If it arises with panya, wisdom, then it knows clearly, accurately, penetratively. Okay? Now, because citta arises together with these cetasikas, which affects its way of knowing. Okay? So, in practice, when we note citta, we can observe a change in citta through the change in this cetasikas. Okay? And usually, when we observe change in the mind, okay, it's easier to observe the change in the mental state than the change in the citta. Because the mental states, they are more active. Okay? So, whereas citta is very passive. Okay? It's just the basic state of knowing. It's very passive. Okay? It's like in the background of the mind. Yeah? You want to see the citta, you just look, you're aware of some object. So you have an experience of the object. And then you look, what is at the back of this experience? What is behind the mind? That is the knowing. Okay? Very passive. So in the section on Cittanupassana, in Satipatṭṭhāna Sutta, Buddha actually instructed the yogis to contemplate the citta, to note the citta, as it arises together with different cetasikas. So, different mental states. So, for example, saraga cittanti pajanati. So when there is citta with attachment, so he knows, he discerns clearly. Okay? There is citta with attachment. Okay? So here, notice the way the Buddha phrased the sentence, saragan cittam, citta with attachment. Okay? He discerns clearly the citta with attachment. So he's not discerning the attachment itself, he's discerning that citta, that knowing, that knowing that comes with attachment. Okay? So the object is the knowing itself, not the attachment. Because it's Cittanupassana. So you are not noting the attachment, rather the consciousness that comes with attachment. There's a difference. If you note the attachment itself, that comes more under the Dhammanupassana. So saragan cittam dipajanati. Okay? So, and then also vitaraga cittam. Vitaraga cittam dipajanati. So when there's citta without attachment, he also discerns clearly. There's citta without attachment. So again, it's the citta itself. So first, the yogi note. So when the consciousness with attachment arises, then you note. You note. What happened when you note? It disappears. Okay? So, when you note with a wholesome mind, the unwholesome mind will disappear. Okay? So, once it disappears, then what happened? What is there? Another consciousness will arise. Another citta will arise in its place. Okay? And that citta is without attachment. Okay? So saraga citta, vitaraga citta, consciousness, one moment. There's a consciousness with attachment. Next moment, because you note, there's a consciousness without attachment. Okay? So when you can note like this, then you realize obviously there is a change in the citta, right? One moment the citta is with attachment, next moment is without attachment. Okay? So it's obvious there is a change in the citta, right? But at first, you see only the change. Okay? So, if your mind is not clear enough yet, you see only this change. You may still think that it's the same citta, the same knowing, There's that one moment, there's attachment, next moment is without attachment, but it's the same citta. You may still think like this. Okay? So, because you only see the change, but if you continue to note the citta, when your mindfulness concentration is sufficiently developed, when the clarity of mind becomes sharp enough, as you continue to note the citta, at some point you will see each citta arising and disappearing. So then when you note the citta with attachment arising, when you note it, you see this citta arising and disappearing clearly. You see the moment it arises and the same moment it disappears. You see the disappearance very clearly. And then this is followed immediately. You see another citta arise. You see this is a new citta. It's not the same citta, it's a new one. You see it arising. And you also see it disappearing. That's when your noting is very sharp and clear. So when your noting is sharp and clear like this, you see each citta arising and disappearing. A citta with attachment arise, disappear. Then citta without attachment arise and disappear. Then you know clearly it's not the same knowing. So, and if you continue to note this citta arising, disappearing moment by moment, you will also eventually come to realize the nature of impermanent suffering non-self of this citta. So here Buddha is actually instructing the yogis to discern the change in the citta. That's why I say there's citta with attachment and then there's citta without attachment. It's the change that you are supposed to be noting. And not just the change. Change is just the beginning. Also arising and disappearing of the citta. Because it's by noting the arising and disappearing of the citta that you can develop insight into its impermanent suffering and non-self. Then also sat dosa citta and vita dosa citta. So citta with dosa and citta without dosa. So again, so when you note clearly, you see one consciousness, one moment is with dosa, next moment is without dosa. And you note even more sharply, clearly, and then you see it's not the same citta. So citta with dosa arise, it disappears, it vanishes completely. Then next, a new citta arises without dosa, and that also passes away. So if you continue along this line of noting the arising and disappearing of citta continuously, you eventually come to see its nature of impermanent suffering non-self. Then also sammoha citta and vita moha citta. Consciousness with moha, delusion, and then consciousness without moha. So then after that the Buddha talk about noting of various kinds of citta. So there's sankita citta. That means the citta that is shrunken, contracted. Okay? This means citta that's affected by tinamida, sloth and torpor. Okay? So, for example, when you're very drowsy, you note the drowsy mind. So, you observe the drowsy mind properly, you see the drowsy minds are shrinking. Right? The heavier the drowsiness, the more it shrinks. It's like the mind becoming smaller and smaller and smaller. Yeah? It's like shutting down. So that's sankita citta. Okay? The knowing that's shrinking. Then there's vikita citta. That means the distracted knowing, knowing that's distracted. Okay, so this is citta that is affected by uddhacca, restlessness. Okay, so you observe the knowing that's restless. Okay, so it's distracted, it's turbulent, it's chaotic. Okay, unsettled. So. And then there's the mahagata citta. Okay? So mahagata means exalted, or lofty, or great. Citta. Okay? So this refers to the rupa and arupa vachara citta. Okay? The citta pertaining to the fine material as well as immaterial sphere. Okay? So this refers to the jhana citta. Okay? Fine material jhana and immaterial jhana citta. Okay? So now, for us, we don't need to concern ourselves about this because we don't develop this citta. We don't develop jhanas. Okay? But those who practice samatha, and then when they switch to vipassana, they can note this mahagata citta. Okay? So, but there is also amahagata citta. So, citta that is not exalted, not great. Okay? So this refers to the kama vachara citta, the sense sphere citta. Okay, so this one we do not. Okay, these are like sense sphere citta, eye consciousness, ear consciousness, nose, tongue, body consciousness, mind consciousness. Okay, like the knowing mind. So knowing mind. So you know the object. Your mind is clear. You see there's object, and then there's the knowing of the object. That knowing, usually yogis call that the knowing mind. Okay, so in our practice we do note this knowing mind. This is a sense sphere consciousness. Okay, so then there's Sauttara citta and anuttara citta. Okay, so this is the same essentially. So Sauttara citta means the sense sphere consciousness. Okay, it's called Sauttara. That means something higher than it. Okay, so the kama vachara citta has the rupa vachara, arupa vachara citta that are higher than it. So it's called Sauttara, yes, something higher. Okay, so kama vachara citta, sense sphere consciousness. This one we know. Okay, eye consciousness and so on. Okay, then anuttara citta again refers to the jhana citta, rupa, arupa vachara citta. Okay, this one we do not know. Okay. Then there's the samahita citta, the citta that is concentrated. Okay, so this one, so when the yogi develop Kanika Samadhi, okay, in Vipassana meditation we develop Kanika Samadhi, it's momentary concentration. Okay? So when you have achieved momentary concentration, you notice every moment you note, okay, that knowing consciousness is fixed on the object. Okay, every moment you note, this object arises, the mind notes. The mind is like fixed on this object, is like absorbed into this object in that moment. Okay, then it's gone. Okay, then next moment another object, again the noting mind, fix. Okay, so again and again it's fix. You see the knowing is fix. Again and again. Okay, different knowing, different moment, different knowing, but each knowing is fixed on the object, fixed on the object. Okay, that's samahita citta. Okay, then there's also asamahita citta. Okay, so when the mind is distracted, not focused. Okay, then there is vimutta citta. Means liberated citta. Citta that are liberated. Here, liberated does not mean liberated from dukkha. Okay? It means it's freed from the mental defilements. Okay? It means pure citta. Okay? So the knowing mind should be pure citta because it comes with mindfulness. Okay? Then there's avimutta citta. Okay? That means it's not freed from the defilements. Okay? That means knowing there's default. Okay? Like when the hindrances arise. So if you note that citta, that's avimutta citta. Okay? So in the Satipatṭṭhāna Sutta, this is how the Buddha instructed on how to carry out Cittanupassana. Okay? So note the citta as it arises with different citasikas, different mental state. Okay? So to note one knowing arise, disappear, followed by another knowing, a different one arising, disappearing. Okay? So first you note the change by seeing the change in the cetasikas. Okay? But as you keep noting and the mind is clear enough, you can see each citta arise and disappear. Okay? So one moment there is attachment, next moment is without attachment. Okay? So in the beginning, as we said, even though you can see the change in the citta, but you may still think that it's the same citta. And usually you identify this citta as a person, the one who knows, as they say. But later on, in the sutta, Buddha also gave instruction to note the nature of arising and nature of disappearing of the citta. Okay? He dwells continuously noting the nature of arising in the citta, also continuously noting nature of disappearing of the citta, or both the nature of arising and disappearing of the citta. Okay? So once the yogi is able to note the arising and disappearing of each citta, clearly, then you realize it's not the same citta. Okay? Every moment is a new citta, new knowing. Okay? Then you realize, okay? There's no knower, no permanent person here who knows. Okay? There's only new citta, moment to moment, new knowing going on. Okay? So this is going into the development of Vipassana. Okay? Insight into impermanent suffering, non-self. No. Because citta is a very subtle nature. This nature knowing is a very subtle nature. It's very difficult to discern its change. Okay? Much less is arising and disappearing. So it's very difficult. So you need to have very good degree of samadhi and continuous mindful noting. Okay? So before you can discern the citta is arising and disappearing. Okay? So Buddha compared citta to a ghost hiding deep in a cave. Okay? A ghost is already very difficult to see. Okay? The ghost is hiding in a cave is even more difficult to see. So citta is very subtle. It's hiding in a cave of your mind. It's in the background, way behind there, in the mind. Okay? So it's so subtle that at first it's difficult to discern the change in the citta directly. Okay? But the mental states, the cettasikas, they are more active and gross. Okay? The mental states like restlessness, sloth and torpor, attachment, dosa, anger, moha, they are more active and gross. So the change in these mental states is easier to discern. Okay? So when we are learning to note the mind, okay, and by mind, it means mind is citta and cetasika together. Okay, mind is not just citta; it's citta and cetasikas together. Okay, as we said just now, they always come together. Okay, so when we are learning to note the mind, usually in the beginning, we are aware more of the cetasika themselves. Okay, because they are more gross, easier to discern. Okay, the nature of the citta, the bare knowing, is more subtle and passive in the background of the mind. Okay, so it's usually, because it's so subtle and passive, it's usually eclipsed by the more active and gross mental states. Okay? So, but as your practice develops, the cetasikas, as your practice develops, as the mindfulness develops, and especially as concentration develops, the mind starts to become more and more refined. So therefore, the cetasikas the mental states becomes more and more refined. Okay, as the mind begins to settle down. Okay, so once they become more and more refined, then you begin to notice the nature of knowing more clearly. Okay, you notice that the citta and cetasikas are always together. Okay, and you notice that when the cetasika change, okay, the citta also change together. Okay, so later on, when your mind becomes even more clear, and you notice how they arise and pass away together. Citta and cetasika, then always arise and pass away together. That means the knowing mind and the noting mind. The noting mind is the cetasikas. Okay? Often you hear yogis talk about knowing mind and noting mind. Okay? Knowing mind is the citta. Okay? Noting mind, they are more active. They are noting, right? That's the cetasika, the mindfulness, the sanya, sati, sanya, vittaka, vichara, all that. Okay? Knowing mind is more passive, in the background. Okay? But they always arise, pass away together. Okay? Yeah. So this is the Buddha's way of doing Cittanupassana. Okay? Aware of the change in the citta together with the cetasikas. Okay? But there's another method of Cittanupassana. Okay? That is by noting the nature of knowing that arise with each sense experiences. Okay? When seeing, or hearing, seeing, hearing, smelling, tasting, touching, thinking. So with each of these sense experiences, okay, every time you note, there's an object, like you're not hearing, you note carefully, there's a sound, and then there's a knowing of the sound. Okay, that knowing of the sound, that's the ear consciousness. Okay, this is the experience of the sound. That is the ear consciousness. Okay, but it's very subtle. As we said, citta is very subtle. Okay, so before you can discern the nature of knowing that arises with each sense experience, first you must develop enough sharpness and clarity in the noting mind. Okay, so you need to develop sati, samadhi, mindfulness and concentration first. Okay, so there must be sufficient mindfulness and concentration for the mind to be clear enough to discern the nature of knowing. Okay, so first you must start with noting the basic primary object, rising, falling, sitting, touching, and so on. Okay, which is more of a Kayanupassana, noting of the body. Okay, so you note the body, note continuously until noting is clear enough, until you discern the rupa sabhava, the material nature clearly. Okay? That means all the four elements, hardness, softness, heat, cold, pushing, tightness, and so on. So that means every time you note rising, falling, you notice the material nature, wind element, pushing of tightness, tension, and so on. Okay? So you develop until you can discern this material nature clearly. Okay? And then you continue noting. Okay? As you continue to note, and the mind is clear enough, okay, You will develop further, become clearer and clearer. And when the mind is clear enough, sharp enough, at some point, you find as you are noting this material nature, as you are noting each material nature, pushing, you notice that there's another nature together with the material nature, the nature of knowing. Okay, so every time when you note pushing, there's a knowing of the pushing. Okay? You're not pushing. Each time you're not pushing, there's a knowing of the pushing. And another pushing, another knowing. Another pushing, another knowing. Okay? It's like the knowing is shadowing the object. Okay? It's like a shadow that follows the object. Okay? Yeah. So, and once you can discern knowing together with the primary object, and then when you note secondary object also, you can discern the knowing together with the secondary object as well. That means when you are noting any experience, whether it's a primary object, secondary object, you always notice there's object and knowing together. Okay? So this actually happens quite naturally as your mindfulness and concentration develop. Okay? So you follow the method of noting. You are noting properly. When your mindfulness concentration develops sufficiently, you begin to notice object and knowing. In the beginning, it's more like just the object, the physical object. Okay? But when you develop sufficiently, the mind is clear enough, naturally, it will pick up the more subtle nature of the mind, the knowing. Okay? So, but sometimes we need to give the yogi a hint, especially a yogi whose mind is very rigid. Follow object means object, nothing else. Rising, falling means rising, falling, nothing else. Even though he may notice more than the rising and falling. He may notice the knowing or the noting mind following the object. Just ignore. So that's why the teacher sometimes, after waiting for some time for the yogi to report the knowing mind, they still don't report. Then we have to ask, do you notice this? And often when they ask this question, they say, oh yes, I notice. But they don't report because they don't think it's important. So in your report, you must report whatever you observe. Okay? So, otherwise the teacher thinks, this one not progressing. So, okay, so you develop until the stage where every time you note, you notice the object and the knowing together. So once this is clear, then if you want to practice Citta, then what you do is you direct your attention each time when you note. You direct the noting only the knowing. Okay, so just note the knowing itself. Okay, but only do this when the knowing is clear in your experience. That means every time you note, you notice the knowing together with the object. Okay, so if you notice the knowing but not consistently, sometimes you know, sometimes you notice it, sometimes you don't. Okay, that means it's not clear enough yet. Okay, then you're not ready yet. Okay, so only when you can notice the knowing every moment, Then if you want to choose Citta Nupassana, then you turn the attention to not just the knowing that arises in each moment of experience. Okay? So, when you do this, you notice that the object itself becomes unclear. It like recedes to the background. That's because you are not paying attention to the object. Okay, you are paying attention more to the knowing of the object. Therefore, it becomes not clear. Okay, that is in the background. It's still there, but it's more like in the background. Okay? So sometimes yogi may think that the noting is not clear. Okay? No, it's because you are not paying attention to the object. You are paying attention to the knowing. Okay? It's like we are talking to two persons, right? At first you are looking at both of them, right? But later on, you want to talk to only this person, so you turn to face that person. So the other person is still there, but at the side. Okay? So you don't see him clearly. Okay? So you direct the noting continuously to just the knowing as it arises with each object in each moment. Okay? So you continue, you watch carefully. So as you continue to note, you watch carefully. When the mind is clear enough, you begin to see the subtle changes in the citta. You see this arising and disappearing moment to moment clearly. Okay? And then from there, you realize its nature of impermanent suffering and non-self. Okay? So once you can do this, you no longer see the citta as a self, as a knower, the person that knows. Okay? You realize there's no permanent knower. Okay? There's just a process of citta arising and disappearing, moment to moment. There's no person here that knows. Okay? That's just the nature of knowing. Okay? Momentary nature of knowing. Okay, so we have already covered the first three of the Satipatṭhāna objects. Okay, now the last one is Dhamma. So Dhamma here, I've seen people take this Dhamma here as the Buddha's teaching. Okay, here is not the Buddha's teaching. Okay. So, this word Dhamma has a very wide range of meaning. Okay, so it's not every time you see the word Dhamma when you read the suttas, don't think it's the Buddha's teaching. Okay, you have to understand its meaning according to the context. So here in the Satipatṭhāna Sutta, Buddha used the word Dhamma in Dhammanupassana. The Dhamma is used in a sense of natural phenomena. Okay, so any natural, mental, or physical qualities, okay, that can arise within the six sense experience. They are Dhammas. Okay. So you can think of Dhamma here means nature. Okay? Mental or physical nature. Okay? So it's often called Sabbhava Dhamma, okay? Or natural qualities, okay? Or Sabbhava Lakkhana, okay? The natural characteristic, okay? Or unique characteristic. Okay? So each mental or physical phenomenon it has a unique nature. Okay? So Buddha taught many different dhammas, many different rupa dhamma, many different nama dhamma, different mental physical nature. Each one of them has a unique nature, a specific nature. That is sabbhava lakkhana. Okay, earth element, the nature of hardness or softness. Okay? Fire element, nature of heat and cold. Citta, consciousness has the nature of knowing. Jotinanda, its nature is to motivate, to encourage, to will the mind. Okay, and so on. So each mental physical nature has a unique nature. Okay? And this unique nature, they are called Dhamma. Okay? The natural mental physical qualities. Okay? So for example, when you note rising, falling, okay? So what are the mental physical nature that are present? Okay? The most prominent nature, of course, is the nature of the wind element, tightness or pushing and so on. Okay? So this is one nature, it's material nature, nature of the wind element. Okay? But wind element is not the only nature present in this experience of rising, falling. Okay? If your noting is clear, sharp, and open enough, you may discern other nature present also. Okay? For example, there's nature of bodily sensitivity. Okay? There's sensitivity to bodily sensation present. Okay? So at the place where you experience rising and falling, your mind is clear enough, sensitive enough. You may notice there's some material nature that is sensitive to bodily sensation. Okay, so this sensitivity is also another nature. Okay, it's a material nature. Okay. This is called sensitive materiality. Okay? And this sensitive materiality, they are found not just at the body door. Okay? So they are found in other senses too, like ear door, eye door, nose door, tongue door. There are this sensitive materiality that are sensitive to their respective object. Okay? So for example, at the ear door, okay, there is sensitivity, material nature that's sensitive to sound. Okay? So without this, you cannot hear. Right? So if you're not hearing, you're not the experience of hearing. Okay? In the beginning, when your noting is not clear, you may think that the sound is outside. But when your noting is very clear, you observe carefully the experience of hearing, you notice that actually the experience of hearing is somewhere inside. It's like the sound is somewhere inside the ear. Okay? So there is a place where the ear is sensitive to the sound. Okay? Where the experience of the sound occurs. That is the ear sensitivity. Okay? In the eye also, there's a eye sensitivity, that's sensitive to colors. Okay? The nose, there's the nose sensitivity, sensitive to smell. Okay? And the tongue, there's the tongue sensitivity, sensitive to taste. Okay? And the body also, there's bodily sensitivity. Okay? Right now you sit here, you're feeling cool, right? So you observe carefully. And the body is sensitive to the coolness. Okay? That is the bodily sensitivity. It's where you experience the coolness. Okay? So it's one of the subtle materiality. Okay? Only when your mind is clear, you can notice it. Okay? You notice it usually as location. Location of the experience itself. Okay? Experience of hearing is somewhere in here. Okay? Experience of seeing is actually in the eye. Smelling is actually in the nose. Okay? That location is where the sensitivity is. Okay? So they manifest as a location of the experience. Okay? And so this sensitivity is a material nature. Okay? So there's the wind element and the sensitivity, both are material nature. Okay? And then there's also the awareness, the knowing of the wind element, knowing of the tension, the pushing and so on. Okay? So that is the knowing. Okay? The citta. Okay? So this is a mental nature. Then there's also, you observe carefully, there's also the mind is also contacting with the object. Okay? So there's phassa, mental contact. Okay? Another mental nature. There's also feeling. Okay? So when the mind contacts the object, there's a feeling that arises. Okay? Pleasant or unpleasant. Okay? So this is also a mental nature. So there is all this nature, mental and physical nature, that are present in each experience of rising and falling. Okay? So when your mind has enough sharpness and clarity, you'll be able to discern this nature of the Dhamma with each noting. Okay? But one at a time. It's not like you note one noting, you can pick up all this nature. The mind can only know one thing at a time. Okay? But because you note continuously, different moments you can pick up different nature. Okay? So you note over a period of time, then you come to know that all this different nature present in each experience of rising and falling. Okay? So, but you note one at a time. Whichever of this nature that is most prominent in the moment. So when the mind is clearly noting this mental or physical nature, one at a time, one after another, moment after moment. So this is called Dhammanupassana. Okay? Noting of the Dhamma continuously. Okay? So Dhamma refers to mental, physical nature. Okay? But if that is the case, then you may also ask, then the first three Satipatṭhāna objects, body, feeling, and consciousness, they are also Dhammas, right? Aren't they Dhammas? They are Dhammas. Body is Rupa, material nature, Rupa Dhamma. Okay? Vedana and Citta, they are Nama Dhamma, right? So then what is the difference? Why did the Buddha have another Anupassana and Dhammanupassana? So the difference is in terms of the noting. Okay, so in the first three Anupassana, okay, you are noting a very specific Dhammas. Okay, Kaya Anupassana, you note only Kaya, only the Rupa Dhamma. Okay, and in Vedana, you note only Vedana. Citta, you note only Citta. Right? So, and you do so. Buddha taught this three Anupassana. Noting of the body, feeling, and Citta. Because these three Dhammas. So, these are the three Dhammas that we usually very strongly identify with as the self. Okay? The body, you identify very strongly as a self, right? So when you go in front of the mirror, you look at your image of your body in the mirror, immediately you think, there I am. There, I'm my beautiful self. Okay, so you identify very strongly with the body as a self. Okay? Feeling also. A strong attachment to feeling. I feel good. I feel wonderful. Or I feel lousy. So it's attached very strongly to feeling as a self. So much so that actually, our whole economic system is based on Vedana. Right? So economy, we talk about supply and demand, right? So what is in demand? And what are we supplying? Products that claim to increase your Sukha Vedana, or help you to decrease or avoid totally Dukkha Vedana. Right? That's how they advertise their product, right? So, see, such a strong attachment to Vedana. People spend their whole life just chasing after Sukha Vedana and avoiding Dukkha Vedana. See? So very strong attachment, identification with the Vedana as a self. Okay? And Citta also, the knowing. We always think we are the knower. Okay? So it's the same person here that knows all the time. Okay? That knows the various objects. That knows the visible form, that knows the sound, the smell, the taste, and so on. Okay? The thing is the same knower. Since the day we are born, it's the same person. So we have a strong identification with Citta as self. Okay? So the Buddha taught this three Anupassana in order to break identification with this body, the feeling, and the consciousness as a self. See clearly that they are not the self. Okay? They are impermanent, suffering, and non-self. Okay? However, the insight that you develop by noting this very specific Dhammas is not comprehensive, right? Because you are only noting one Dhamma, right? So you may see this Dhamma, this particular Dhamma, as impermanent, suffering, non-self, right? But what about other Dhammas that you don't know? Okay, so the insight is not comprehensive. You may still take them, these other Dhammas, as permanent, pleasurable as a self. Okay? So therefore, you are Dhammanupassana. Dhammanupassana, noting is comprehensive. Okay? In Dhammanupassana, all the sankharas, all the mental physical nature without exception that arise, as long as they are prominent in the moment you note, you leave nothing out of your noting. Okay? So therefore the insight that is developed is also comprehensive, tara. Okay? Only if you note thoroughly in this way, then only you may come to a conclusion, sabbe sankhara anicca. All the formations are impermanent. Okay? Sabbe sankhara dukkha. All the formations are dukkha. All are anatta. Okay? So for example, when you first note the rising falling, okay? So when you note rising falling, is more like kaya nupassana, right? You're noting only the wind element that arise with each rising and falling, okay? But as you note continuously, later as the mind becomes clearer and clearer, sharper and sharper, begin to notice also the other Dhammas present together with the wind element, nature, knowing, feeling, contact, mental contact, bodily sensitivity, and so on. Okay, so all this more subtle Dhammas becomes clear gradually as you persist on in the work of noting. Okay. And so once they become clear, you begin to note them as they arise in the experience. So when you do this, that means you begin to shift from kaya nupassana to dhammanupassana. Okay? So in dhammanupassana, the mind is open to all mental, physical nature that arise without exception. Okay? So you keep noting one Dhamma after another. Okay? Whichever is prominent in the moment, you keep noting. Okay? One Dhamma after another. So the idea is to note continuously until you realize that everything in your experience, they are just mental, physical nature. Okay? They are just Dhammas. Experience is just Dhammas. Okay? The experience is empty of any self. There's no person, no being, no self. Okay? Just nature, just Dhamma, mental, physical nature, moment to moment. Okay? So this is the feature of Dhammanupassana, non-self. Feature very strongly in Dhammanupassana. Okay, so you note until you see everything is just Dhamma, just mental, physical nature that are momentary. Okay? And there's no person, no being, no self present in each moment of experience. Okay? Okay, so in Dhammanupassana, you're noting many mental physical nature continuously, one after another, okay? Moment to moment. Okay? Now, to be able to practice this, and also because this mental physical nature, okay? They come very, very fast, one after another. Okay? So to be able to note continuously each Dhamma that arises, the noting mind needs to be very agile, very flexible, open, adaptable, and swift. So you must be able to switch from noting one to the other. So, because you are not noting only rising, falling. Okay? So when you come to Dhammanupassana, okay, you are not noting just only the rising, falling. Okay? But you are noting whatever prominent nature that arises in a sixth sense experience, moment to moment. So your noting is extended to cover all the sixth sense experience. Okay? Not just rising, falling, which is only the body door experience. So the mind needs to be able to adapt fast, okay, from one noting of one Dhamma to noting of another Dhamma, okay, noting of one sense door to another sense door, okay. So therefore Dhammanupassana, okay, it's not a practice that you do right from the beginning of the practice. Okay, it's not a practice for beginners. Okay, not only Dhammanupassana, Cittanupassana also. Okay, it's not a practice for beginners. Okay, so because these two objects, they are very subtle. Okay, so in the beginning of your practice, the mind is not sufficiently developed yet. Not enough strength, not enough continuity, not enough sharpness and clarity, okay, to be able to follow and watch moment to moment. Okay? So if you try to do so, you cannot keep up. Okay? So it's a practice that you do only after mindfulness has developed sufficiently. Okay? So once the mindfulness has developed sufficient strength, sufficient intensity, and focus, samadhi. Okay? So the mindful noting is occurring continuously. Okay? Moment to moment, and noting mind is agile, malleable, proficient, and is able to move from noting of one nature to another easily, picking up one clear nature after another. Okay, so when this happens, so noting is going on with momentum. Okay, noting one Dhamma after another continuously. Okay, so it's like just noting is just Dhamma, nature. Continuously, they are just mental physical nature. Okay, so you note like this continuously until the whole field of experience, in fact your entire existence itself, resolve into just Dhammas, just nature, mental physical nature. Okay? There's no person, no being, no self, no living entity, nothing, just Dhammas. Okay? So this Dhammanupassana. Okay? Okay, we stop here tonight.